Tonight, the rest of the world comes to say welcome home, and may no one ever attempt to take your home from you. I heard these words just 2 days ago from U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee at the ceremony that marked the reopening of the ancient pilgrimage road in the city of David. This is a road I worked on for over 20 years. This happened just 1 week before the United Nations is set to vote on recognizing a Palestinian state. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu were also in attendance. The Prime Minister made it absolutely crystal clear. He said Jerusalem is forever our city, and it will never be divided again, and there will be no Palestinian state. Any unilateral action will be met with unilateral action. Then Secretary Rubio spoke about the common source of the bond between the U.S. and Israel, and he knows this so well. I personally have guided him in the city of David, and he could probably give the tour, like Ambassador Huckabee. He said, this is an enduring cultural and historical bond with Jerusalem, a powerful reminder of the values that inspired America's founding fathers. The message 2 days ago from the city of David about Jerusalem was unmistakable. While the United Nations is preparing yet another resolution, the real vote was cast this week in Jerusalem. It was cast in stone. It was cast with the truth, yes, in the truth, and in the eternal bond between the Jewish people and their land. The question is, why is this happening now? Well, the discovery of the pilgrimage road isn't new. As a matter of fact, I remember going back to 2005, so that's 20 years ago, when we uncovered next to the Siloam pool, which was the largest water source in ancient Jerusalem, a small stair. We followed that stair through an underground tunnel underneath it and saw stairs over our head that go all the way up in the direction of the Temple Mount. It's taken 20 years battling against some of Israel's worst enemies to uncover that road. But the question is, why did Secretary of State Rubio, the Ambassador Huckabee, Prime Minister Netanyahu, what is the meaning of this week? Well, next week is going to be the United Nations vote on a supposed Palestinian state. There we stood over the Givati parking lot at the entrance to this road. If you can imagine a parking lot that in the early 2000s, a group of people offered to sell the parking lot to the city of David, and we didn't have the money at the time. So we said, no, we don't have the money, and they sold it instead to the Palestinian Authority. I talk about this in my book, When the Stones Speak. The Palestinian Authority almost owned the parking lot of the city of David, which would have given them access from East Jerusalem directly onto the Temple Mount. Well, Prime Minister Sharon scuttled that deal, and a group of private investors bought the parking lot. And after they did, a group of archaeologists came to us and said, we didn't want to say anything because we weren't sure who was going to run this parking lot, but we believe if you dig down, you're going to find a few archaeological civilizations. Well, ladies and gentlemen, young and old, today, I can tell you in that parking lot, and this is where those speeches were made, there are 11 civilizations. This is a portal through time. And it was directly over this that the Prime Minister, the Ambassador, and the Secretary of State spoke about the Jewish connection to Jerusalem. And we have to understand what that means and why it was uttered just a week before the United Nations is going to vote. Well, just a week ago, there was something passed in the UN called the United Nations New York Resolution. Now, this is non-binding, but this is a sign of which to come. 142 states, countries voted in favor of creating time-bound and irreversible steps towards a Palestinian state and a government free of Hamas, as if a Palestinian state free of Hamas is not going to turn into a Hamas state. We tried that, folks. It's called Gaza. When Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005, and I was there, pulling people out of our homes, as we've discussed, friends of mine, encouraging them to leave peacefully. Well, that was an area that was supposed to be set up as a Palestinian state. A year later, the Gazan people voted, and they voted for Hamas, because we want this, of course, to be a democracy. And now, 20 years later, we are in a life and death battle with Hamas after they tore apart, victimized, and massacred our people. So a Palestinian state in bordering Israel again is simply a precursor to Hamas. You take off the wrapping paper, you look inside, and the present you're getting is a Hamas state. Well, in the coming days at the United Nations Leadership Summit, which is going to be on September 22nd, just right around the corner, countries like France, we talked about them last week, and their failed leadership, only 15% approval rating. The UK, which is catering to its Islamic base, Canada, Australia, Belgium, and Malta are going to be making political statements that are going to be moving towards formal recognition of what is known as Palestine. Now, on paper, this looks like momentum, but if you look a bit deeper, you realize that this is really only one thing. This is political theater. This is only symbolic, but it is a move that dangerously, not only for Israel, but for other countries in the world, completely ignores history, ignores the facts on the ground, ignores reality, and it ignores archaeology. Now, America understands this more than any other country in the world, and America is absolutely opposed to this declaration of a Palestinian state. And, you know, we know today that the America-Israel bond stands above the world. Have you ever wondered why? Now, some people will say, well, there are a lot of American Jews in America and they have influence, and this is true. American Jews have contributed immensely to America. They have the freedom to vote. They are well known in certain areas, Hollywood, business, economics, and many areas. And there is, of course, they are a constituent of America, but that doesn't explain America's bond with Israel, especially considering the majority of the bond between Israel and the United States today is not because of the Jews. It's because of the Christians in America, not because of the Jews. And this is really because, as opposed to many other countries in the world, America is a country that is still rooted in heritage, values, and religion. America sees itself as really a divine experiment, one that has a purpose that went to change the entire world and has changed the world, to create a democracy, the first one without kings, without any type of royalty whatsoever, the first one in history where the people actually are able to vote. And while America's on shaky ground, we are going to be having the 250th anniversary of America coming up next year. And it is a testament that this country has lasted so long, still has a democracy, still have people that can go from absolutely nothing to something. And we take it for granted in America. I'm in Israel. We have something similar here. But in America, we take that for granted. But that doesn't exist anywhere around the world. The core element of that is because the founders of this revolutionary idea based America on the prophecy that came out of Jerusalem and the biblical truth that underlies both America and Israel and monotheism, which is that every single human being is created in the image of one God. That means whether you are a man or a woman, whether you are black, white, choose your background and your ethnicity, absolutely every single one of us goes back to the same source. And once we accept that, then there is an inherent freedom for every person that has goodwill and is a loyal citizen of that country, not an enemy of that country, and not a person that invades that country illegally. But every legal member of that country has the exact same rights and voting opportunities. And that is exactly what binds Israel and the U.S. together. And when many Americans look at Israel, they don't just see another state in the Middle East. They see a people who, against all odds, returned to their ancestral homeland, rebuilt their society, established a democracy, and all of this is on the basis of the same values as the United States. And make no mistake, that is the core to the bond. You know, it's funny, at the City of David opening, I was listening to all the speeches and everyone spoke nice. But what moved me were the speeches of those two non-Jews, Secretary of State Rubio and Ambassador Huckabee. They were the ones that spoke about the divine vision of the Jewish people. And why does it come so naturally to them? Because they so naturally can speak this way in the United States of America. And the American people understand it. Actually, in Israel, only now is this type of vision being enabled to be explained to the people. There were years that Israel was rejecting its divine purpose, but today it's back. And we don't know any thanks to Hamas, but on October 7th, it is alive and well. Well, the reason that this was held in the City of David is because the archaeology at the site of the City of David, more than any other place in the entire world, documents the Bible, and it documents the genuine Jewish connection to Jerusalem and Israel. It does this more powerfully than any Palestinian narrative that claims ownership and ignores completely reality. And what is so powerful about the city of David, this is not a political opinion. This is not just more conjecturing in front of the cameras. This is based on empirical evidence. And if you want to understand the facts about what proves this connection, in fact, what is the foundation of Judaism and by extension, the foundation of Christianity based on the facts and how Israel's enemies tried to stop this excavation, what I battled with for 20 years, then grab a copy of my new book, When the Stones Speak, The Remarkable Discovery of the City of David and What Israel's Enemies Don't Want You to Know. In the United States, this book became a bestseller in 4 days, a New York Times bestseller. Yes, the New York Times that is so critical of Israel could not ignore that so many people in America want to understand the roots of the Jewish people in Israel, the source of Israel, because that is also the roots of the American people in their own land, because we dwell from the exact same source. In the book, I detail how the forces of evil, when they discovered that we had discovered the pilgrimage road, how they did almost everything to try to stop us. I'll give you one example. There was one day we were digging the pilgrimage road and it was in all its glistening beauty. I'll explain what the pilgrimage road is for some of you who may not know. At the bottom of the city of David, which is ancient Jerusalem, going back to the Bible, we found a pool by mistake. There was a sewage leak and we found a gorgeous pool that goes back 2,000 years, massive in size, more than an Olympic-sized pool. And from that pool, we said, well, what is this? People weren't swimming in the ancient world, and we realized that this was an ancient mikveh. A mikveh is a ritual bath where people can descend and purify themselves, and that was used to pray at the Holy Temple. The Holy Temple was the center of Judaism, the center of monotheism. It's the place that Abraham bound Isaac, and afterwards where King David and King Solomon built the temple. And it was to pray to one God, and everyone in the world was allowed to visit the temple. Well, to go in the temple, you had to purify. Where could 1 million people purify themselves? In this massive pool that was a mikveh. The problem is that the mikveh, the ritual bath, is located half a mile from the temple, and you can't touch anything impure. And so we found this road and we realized this is the original purification road. For the pure as you go into the temple. Imagine people wearing their cloth robes from all over the world, Ethiopian Jews, Indian Jews, Jews from Syria and Iraq, and non-Jews from around the world, traveling together to a single temple, shoulder to shoulder. Well, when we found that road, it was fabulous. However, we didn't anticipate the reaction of the Muslims. They saw this road as the biggest threat to Islam ever. Why? Because this road, which I detail in the book, when you walk this road and you end up at the gates of the Temple Mount, which today the Al-Aqsa Mosque stands on top of, well, you realize something very simple. The Jews were walking this road thousands of years before Muhammad came to the world. Now, Islam's a religion. However, Islam's trying to make the claim that they were here before Judaism and before Christianity, that they are the original indigenous people to the land. And that simply is a lie. And so when they saw the pilgrimage road, they tried everything to stop it, including killing the leader of my project, my former boss and the founder of the city of David, David al-Bayri, who was saved by another Arab when this hit was taking place. Again, I detail it in the book. And then they forced all of our Arab workers to quit, threatening them, saying you're collaborating with the enemy. And unfortunately, over 100 Arab workers had to quit an excavation that was putting bread on their tables. And those same Muslim extremists of the Muslim Brotherhood and all the left-wing organizations that joined them, none of them found those people jobs. And I know because I'm in touch with many of these workers even decades later. But that's the left. They really don't care about the people that they're torturing and forcing not to collaborate with the state of Israel. This is the meaning of why they held these announcements in this parking lot and walked up this road, because it proves that connection so very well. Now, I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about the United Nations and what does this road mean in light of what's going to happen next week at the UN. And you're going to hear a lot of headlines. I'm sure the New York Times is going to pick this up. United Nations votes for Palestinian state. Palestinians closer to the state. You'll turn on CNN. Israel defeated by the UN. You're going to hear all this stuff, and you know what it is? We say in Yiddish, bubkis, which is another word for BS, which is another word for it's a ruse, which is another word for they're just speaking garbage. The United Nations today is a bastion of moral corruption. And we know this, and we're not likely to change their vote. However, when the institution was originally set up in 1945, it was set up with 51 members after World War II, which were essentially the Allied forces. It was an institution that had real help. However, Britain and France were holding tons of colonies around the world. And between 1950 and 1970, they removed themselves from those colonies, and those colonies became independent. And many of them were taken over and turned into despotic regimes. Many of them were turned into Muslim strongholds, like many of the nations you see today. Libya is one example, but there were just numerous ones, Algeria. And the United Nations was expanded from 51 member states to 193 member states. Now, when this happened, in 1969, there was an alliance that was formed of 57 members, which are Muslim countries. Those 57 Muslim countries vote as a bloc. And together with the other non-aligned states, none of which you'd want to live in, they have over 100 automatic votes in the UN Assembly. Today, the Western powers have shrunk to 30 to 40 votes. So what this means is that there's a majority in the United Nations General Assembly that can automatically pass any resolutions, and this is really used for one purpose. Well, I should say two. First of all, it is used to isolate Israel. If you look back before 2023, October 7th, before Israel defended itself in the most righteous war ever, in which we are accused falsely of committing genocide, before all of this happened, from 2015 to 2023, there were 154 resolutions passed by the General Assembly against Israel. 154 condemnations of Israel. Now take every other country in the world during those 8 years, there were 71. Meaning Israel is so bad, the absolute worst country in the world, the only democracy in the Middle East, people who came to their home based on a General Assembly recognition, fought off enemies numerous times, has no desire whatsoever to take over the world. We are twice as bad as every other evil country in the world combined. The second reason that they go after Israel, so that the world really won't have time to look at China, North Korea, Russia, Saudi Arabia, yes, which hung hundreds of people this year in their streets, Iran, which has hung over 800 people since Israel struck Iran, Sudan, where there's slavery. On a positive side, if there is such a thing, they have absolutely no power whatsoever. The General Assembly is only political theater. There is no bite to any of these resolutions. It doesn't look good. The only power in the United Nations is the Security Council, which is members such as United States, France, England, Russia, China, and so on. And they have a veto vote, and the only power they have is under Article 7 with respect to threats to peace. Breaches of peace, they can call up when Iraq invaded Kuwait. The Security Council demanded a blockade, and every other country is commanded and forced to agree with that. That's the only power it has. So all of these declarations have no power. Now, a few of you out there should be asking the question, well, if the General Assembly has no power, well, how did the state of Israel become a state in 1948? This is true. At the end of 1947, in November, the United Nations passed Resolution 181, which is the partition plan of Israel into two different states, one for Israelis and Jews, one for Arabs, which later called themselves Palestinians, now added down. Israel accepted this. The Palestinians and the Arabs rejected this and said they're basically going to erase Israel. Israel then in May 1948 reached out and fought for its own future and won. So this may be a surprise for people. The state of Israel does not exist because of a General Assembly vote, which is non-binding. The General Assembly vote was a recommendation for the state of Israel. Israel took this recommendation and, against a lot of international pressure, said, we are going to declare state. On their own declared a state, were attacked by 7 armies and additional armies outside, defended themselves, and established their borders during the War of Independence. That is why Israel exists, not because of the United Nations. In fact, Israel doesn't even exist because of that war which we won. What Ambassador Huckabee and Rubio and the Prime Minister were saying, and what I'm saying here, Israel exists because of a 4,000-year connection of the Jewish people. We are not here today because of the Balfour Declaration and not because of a UN resolution. What enabled us and caused us to go to a place that is surrounded by Arab countries, stand up and fight for our existence, in 1948, in 1967, in 1973, in the 1980s, stay here while Iraq bombed us, the first intifada, the second intifada, all the wars with Gaza, and after October 7th, the fight is because we know that this is our indigenous land. That is why we are here. And that is the power of the statements that were made at the City of David opening. Well, this event was not only aimed at the UN. What is this message sent to the region? Well, this is a message also to the Middle East. Now, today there's a lot of talk about Qatar and Israel striking Qatar. I spoke about Qatar last week, and many of you heard what I had to say. There's no question that the US could have boycotted this event, but they didn't. Not only did they not boycott the event, they came out in full force speaking about truth and history. This puts pressure directly on Qatar. Qatar is the world's largest supporter, financial supporter of terrorism. How old is Qatar? Let's go back. United States, 1776. Qatar before or after? Before? No, after. How about 1800? How about the Civil War, 1860? Qatar before or after? Civil rights movement in the 50s? Maybe the 60s? Qatar was founded in 1971. There was no nation of Qatar. When it gained independence from Britain, before that it was a British protectorate based on all archaeological finds, and you can fact check this. Qatar was sparsely inhabited by fishing villages, pearl divers, and nomadic Bedouin tribes. But there was no enduring national civilization whatsoever. The rise of Qatar only came with the discovery of oil and natural gas, which, as we discussed, is now the world's largest national gas field that it shares together with the nicest country in the world, the most peace-loving country in the world. Sweden? No. Switzerland? No. Iran. Of course, I'm saying this tongue-in-cheek. Qatar has used that wealth to bankroll Hamas. They bankroll Hezbollah. They house Hamas's leadership in its Doha hotels all the time while buying out politicians and reporters all throughout the Middle East, all throughout the United States. This is even coming to Israel with the Qatargate crisis that we're dealing with right now. The contrast between Qatar and Israel could not be sharper. Israel's roots are 4,000 years deep. They are literally carved in stone, and they're proven by archaeology in the City of David. Qatar's roots are only a few decades old. The ceremony in Jerusalem sends a very, very clear message. History and truth are going to outlive terror, petrodollars, and UN votes that are made by a General Assembly that has been completely infected with extremism. Muslim extremism, it is unfortunately no longer an institution. Now, the book is coming out in Israel, and I've had a number of people ask me, well, what do you mean it's coming out in Israel? I said, yeah, it's coming out in Hebrew. They said, well, Israelis must know this stuff. No, Israelis do not know this stuff. There's a reason why it was Huckabee and why it was the Secretary of State that were speaking about the Jewish connection to Israel. Israelis are able to fight for our land. We know we go back here 4,000 years, but we are less aware than perhaps you are that there is a conscious war aimed at erasing the history of Israel. In Israel, we often argue amongst ourselves while outsiders are claiming we have no right to be here whatsoever. The claims you hear that Israelis and Jews are colonialists, an arm of Western colonialism. We came here out of nowhere. We have no connection to the land. The Jews in Israel today are not the ancient Jews of the world. All of this stuff that's disproven by history, by DNA, that I talk about in the book in English, Israelis are less aware of this. They're aware that Arab countries want to kill us. They're less aware, which is part of the reason why our Hasbara, our PR, is so far behind the rest of the world. I mean, first of all, we're an entire country, an entire Jewish people of 14 million, with many wonderful supporters around the world that are not Jewish, but the Muslims are 1.5 billion. That's one reason. The other reason is Israel still does not gather that the eighth front in this war, as someone told me the other day, which is the first front, is the battle over the consciousness of what Israel is in the world and our right to this land and what we are fighting for. That is why, if you have any cousins in Israel, I ask of you to send them this book. Tell them to buy the book. It's called When the Stones Speak in Hebrew, Tnu La'avanim Ledaber, and it is coming out just after Rosh Hashanah so that Israelis know, and Israelis know how to fight, that we will take the Israelis who know how to fight a physical war, and we will teach them about the war over narratives, to speak like they are the indigenous people of this land so that when they travel and they go out around the world, They know the internal fact-based right to this land and are able to defend this land. It is critical for Israelis, just like it is critical for you and for me. As the UN gathers in New York next week to debate the resolutions, keep in mind these resolutions will eventually vanish over time. But Jerusalem has already spoken. When you walk through the city of David, when you walk anywhere in Jerusalem, anywhere in the state of Israel, from north to south, and your feet touch the earth of Israel, there is an energy in that ground that is a divine energy. It is the voice of a creator that is speaking from within the soil, within the stones. It vibrates and reverberates through every single person. The Pilgrimage Road is one example. It's truer, it's older, and it's more enduring than any political maneuver whatsoever. Ambassador Huckabee's words, they still echo with me, and I think they always were. Tonight, he said, and I will go back to this line again, the rest of the world comes to say welcome home, and may no one ever, ever attempt to take your home away from you. This is a message to Israel. This is a message to the region and to the world. This land is not held by permission from anyone. It is held by history, and the history has already cast its vote. Join me next week on True East. May we look towards a brighter future. Be strong. May we be strong. And together, our strength and our bravery and courage will eventually destroy the words of those who are against us, will endure longer than them as they became and become a page, the back page of the history book. Thank you.